I was probably 10 years old, and one night during the week we were having dinner, and my dad had a little announcement to make. He said that he had lost his job. He was laid off from work. And this was back in the early 1980s when there was a recession in our economy. I just remember the impact that it had on me. There was the shock of it, like, what does this mean? The fear, the sadness, are we gonna have food? How are we gonna survive? But I remember the calmness and the confidence that my dad had. He said not to worry, that he had a couple leads and that he'd have a job soon enough. And sure enough, within several weeks, my dad did have a job and things became kind of normal again. I think about that image and that story, my dad as a working father, as we embark upon these reflections during the year of St. Joseph. Pope Francis wrote that beautiful letter back in December about St. Joseph and the different aspects that we can think about when we look at St. Joseph. Today I'd like to reflect on St. Joseph as a working father. It's one of the aspects Pope Francis gave us to reflect upon. But I'd like to do it in this way. I'd like to look at God the Father and St. Joseph. Both of those are fathers of Jesus, God the Father and St. Joseph. If you go back to the book of Genesis, you see that God the Father is a worker. He labors, he creates. On the seventh day, he rested from the work that he had done, and he looked back and he called it good. And the same thing with St. Joseph. He was a carpenter, he labored. But both fathers, God the Father and St. Joseph, as all working fathers, there's a couple things they bring to our lives and they brought to Jesus' life. One of the things is stability. In God the Father's situation, it's bringing order out of something chaotic. It's an idea that I have borrowed from someone else, but it's right there in the scriptures. If you notice from the first from the first line of Genesis, there is this formless wasteland. The first line from the first chapter of Genesis, and the Spirit hovered over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And so he's bringing order out of this chaotic situation, this raw material that's already presented to us in the scriptures. God the Father, in his work, as a laborer, as a worker, brings orderliness out of something chaotic. He creates the heavens, the earth. He creates the plants, the animals, the shrubs. He creates man and woman. And there's an order to all of this. He gives authority to man and woman to have dominion over the fish of the sea, the animals, the plants, the food that they can have from creation. The same thing with St. Joseph in the life of the Holy Family. There's two aspects of St. Joseph where I see particularly where he was thrown into situations that were chaotic, but orderliness was brought out of them. The first one was personal. So St. Joseph, you remember, was betrothed to Mary, but then he finds out that Mary is pregnant through the Holy Spirit. But St. Joseph must have had a lot of questions, and he wrestled with this. He wrestled what to do with Mary. And the scriptures said that he did not want to expose her to the full effect of the law, but wanted to divorce her quietly. And then one night in a dream, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary into your home. And Joseph, trusting with his faith in God, does that. He takes Mary as his wife into his home. Personally, the chaotic situation for Joseph was, what do I do with my betrothed? I don't know what to do. Through his faith and through this prayer that happens through the dream, Joseph accepts Mary as his wife, and order is brought back into his life and into Mary's life. The second thing that Joseph and Mary and Jesus were thrown into a chaotic situation. Remember, early on in Jesus' life, as he's an infant, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus have to flee to Egypt because Herod is hunting down this baby Jesus. And you think about this. They have each other, but Joseph is now moving into another country. He's leaving his job behind in Galilee, and he has to find work to support Mary and Jesus. He has his trade skills as a carpenter, but we can imagine, maybe for days or weeks, there might have been some anxiety in how he was going to help Mary and Joseph and himself survive, how he was going to provide a livelihood for them. The scriptures are silent, but we can say Joseph probably found some work down there in Egypt. And order was brought back into the life of Mary and Jesus and Joseph. So it's one of the aspects I'd like to look at is order that comes out of chaos, but through work. And God the Father, 6 days working to build up creation. The seventh day he rested, something chaotic and then something orderly. And the same thing in St. Joseph's life. And what can we take from that? The order that work does bring to our life. Without it, we'd have a lot of time on our hands and we'd be scattered here and there. But work brings stability and order to all of our lives. Another thing I'd like to look at is the aspect of work and Joseph as a working father is the joy and the beauty of actually creating something out of raw material. Joseph, of course, has the wood, the stone, whatever he worked with, the raw material, and then creating something beautiful out of that. God the Father, in the same way, if we're looking at these two different fathers of Jesus, the raw material, the formless wasteland, and something good is coming out of that. God himself rests on the seventh day and calls it good. No matter if we're tradesmen, no matter if we're workers, dealing with concepts or organizing people, there's something beautiful as we create and as we engage in work to see the finished product, and we can sit back and say, I'm part of creation here. I'm part of this creative energy and power that we see in God the Father. He brought form and order out of the wasteland. You and I, as we work, we bring form and order out of the raw materials, whether it's conceptual, whether it's actual, wood or steel or stone. There's a satisfaction that we're allowed to have and that we do have in that because it's part of our world to work and to bring order and to create things. One of the other things I'd like to look at is Jesus himself and what he must have learned from God the Father, of course, as the second person of the Holy Trinity. If we can say that Jesus learned, it was part of that, but also what Jesus learned from Joseph. Jesus brings order to our chaotic world. So he himself, by being obedient to the Father, being sent to be born of the Virgin Mary, enters into our world. If we could say that the peace, the tranquility, the comfort of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and now God the Son comes into our chaotic world to bring order into it. He certainly labored, no doubt, alongside his father Joseph during those years in Nazareth and in Galilee. And then he labored by preaching the good news in those years of his public life. He gave himself over to it. What was chaotic, and you see it so much in the scriptures, people suffering through diseases, blindness, being possessed by demons, people being oppressed, people not believing, faithless people, and Jesus bringing order into that, instilling faith or drawing faith out of people, healing people both physically and spiritually. Jesus bringing order out of something that is chaotic. So Jesus brings that, but he must have learned it through his own father and through St. Joseph. A couple other things I'd just like to talk about what Jesus learned from his own working father. He must have been close to Joseph, working whether there's a wood shop or on the job site. I just think about the connection that Jesus and Joseph must have had. And even after Joseph died, we don't know when he died, but we can suppose that Joseph died before Jesus went out into his public ministry, before he was baptized in the Jordan River. Then, of course, Jesus, for 3 years, walked around Galilee and Jerusalem and the whole area, preaching and teaching and healing. And then he dies, carries the cross, and then, of course, rises from the dead. But even at those most critical times, when Jesus is going through his passion, he's carrying the cross, the heavy cross. I can only imagine Jesus having felt that wood before, knowing what that wood is like, and in the stark aloneness of carrying that cross, maybe in the back of his mind, thinking about St. Joseph, all the times that he spent with his dad in his shop, knowing that wood, knowing that his own father had turned that raw wood into something beautiful. Jesus also, many things that he would have learned from St. Joseph. Galilee, a region where there were many different cultures, not just the Jewish culture, but there were other cultures, non-Jewish people there. And Joseph working side by side with different people, learning how to work together. And Jesus, so many different times, he leaves the Jewish territory and he sees faith present there in other people, the Syrophoenician woman, and he draws it out of them. And he notices their faith, even though he's not from their culture, and there's a difference there. I wonder if Jesus would have learned this from St. Joseph. Jesus learning the story of how Joseph and Mary came together. Maybe after work, Joseph comes home, and over the many years as they're having dinner together, the stories of Jesus' birth are talked about. And Jesus hears how Joseph maybe was thinking about divorcing Mary, but because of his prayer and his faith and listening to the message in the dream, he took Mary as his wife into his home. And then years later, I do wonder, as Jesus is faced with the woman at the well, or the woman caught in adultery, and in his own human ways, of course, Jesus is God and he's human, true God and true man. In his humanity, remembering and understanding how Joseph treated a woman that was on the fringes. And as Jesus sits down next to the woman at the well, or is confronted with the woman caught in adultery, he hearkens back to those dinner time conversations and how Joseph treated his mother Mary. A lot of hidden things happened in Nazareth. There are no words recorded of what Joseph spoke, but we know that he was the father of Jesus, the husband of Mary. And we can surmise many things have been that were learned from Jesus through his time with Joseph. But today's we're reflecting on Joseph as working father. What I started with, the stability and order that it brought to Jesus' life, to Mary's life. And for all of us, the goodness of work. There is toil. Yes, we're exhausted, we're tired, but there's something beautiful too about it because God is embedded in that. No matter what we do as work, physical work, intellectual work, mental work, whatever it is, turning that raw material into something new, enjoying what we have done, it is part of God's creation. And in some little way, it brings order into something chaotic. And we have this in common with St. Joseph and with Jesus, among many other things that we have in common with them. This is one thing I'd like to ask, to reflect on today with you, is St. Joseph as working father.